have a vested
Henrik Sala explores what lies beneath. A new satellite is giving us data from above.
We'll learn more about our oceans and climate change, but from space. A new satellite's been launched from California. Its mission: track the accelerating rise of sea levels.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. And this is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise.
Data gathered from Sentinel-6 will be used alongside information from other satellites to build as complete a picture of the oceans as possible.
With a long record, we can precisely measure the acceleration. We eventually can detect new regime, tipping points. For example, if there is a runaway in the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, sea level will record this runaway change because it is an integrator of all changes that are occurring in the climate system. So we will be able to see some change, big change in the global climate.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects that sea level rise will increasingly threaten U.S. coastlines. One example, the southern tip of Manhattan is expected to flood 20 to 40 times a year by 2030.
11 of the 15 largest megacities are located at the coast. And this number will double, the number of people living in coastal area will double by 2060. So knowing how much sea level is rising at the coast and how much it will rise in the future in coastal areas is as obvious. It's obviously a major goal for human beings.
Coming up, from sails to steam to oil, the shipping industry is no stranger to change. But how will it navigate the next transition? This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabazaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
One of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast, and it's not going to be easy.
Now the
second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions, and equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at a regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube size concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously, if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-Concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, E-Concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing E-Concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-Concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call biogenic buildup. With time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-Concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, E-Concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube. It is Wednesday. I'm calling it Christmas Eve, December 23rd, 2020. I'm Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenovic, host of Bloomberg Quick Take, and Bizarro World. It continues.
Bizarro World continues, but I will say it's not just Christmas Eve, it's also Festivus.
Oh, Festivus.
Yeah, so happy Festivus, Carol.
Good to know, everybody. Happy Festivus.
The airing of grievances will happen later.
Oh, let's begin now. Because certainly the president is weighing in with his grievances about that stimulus package, and it's just brought it to a halt.
That was a shock to me.
It was a shock to me, too. And I think to the rest of the world. But not to the markets, because we've got the NASDAQ at a record. Everything's fine. Let's check in with that trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet. Everything is
green on the screen, higher across the board right now. In fact, looking at records on NASDAQ, do want to begin with a headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service, and that having to do with the latest death toll in the United States. The death toll, or the number of people who are getting coronavirus vaccines, continues to surge here in the United States. More than 1 million have gotten vaccine doses, this according to the CDC. In the meantime, though, the number of coronavirus cases is rising to a record. We've got the S&P up 22 now, up 0.6%, higher by 255 points on the Dow, up 0.9%. S&P up 21 points, 3709. Nasdaq at a record up 27, up by 0.2%. 10-year down 12.30 seconds, 10-year yield 0.95%. Gold up 0.7, 18.73 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.8%, 48.32 a barrel. Again, repeating the headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. CDC says more than 1 million in the U.S. have gotten vaccine doses. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, the numbers are growing. All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. This portion brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. All right, let's learn more about this trade, Tim Stenovic, because let's see what Vince Signorella has to say as we set the Business Week agenda. Vince is global macro strategist at Bloomberg News. He's with us, as he always is, through this shutdown on the phone from White Plains, New York. How are you?
I'm doing okay. If I could just get one, you know what I want for Christmas for 2020, because it's been such a rotten year. Yeah. Do the damn Brexit deal so I never have to talk about it again.
Were you listening in on our editorial call?
You should.
No, I wasn't.
Because
that's exactly what it was. That's
really?
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Like, everybody's like, Brexit? Are you kidding me? Like, and if we get it done, are we really done? Or could they still postpone it even further?
I told Carol this the other day, but our colleague Emma Chandra in London, she joins us often on Quick Take to talk about Brexit and give us updates. And she said she's had 2 kids since the UK voted to leave the European Union.
And they're now entering high school.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm only kidding on that part. They're still little. No, listen, I agree with you. It's like one of those, talk about climbing a wall of worry. This is like the Mount Everest wall of worry when it comes to Brexit, Vince.
Absolutely. But on a positive note...
He doesn't want to talk about it. He's done. He has moved on.
Brexit, schmexit, I don't want to talk about it.
Well, talk to me... explain this. How is it that the president does what he's doing in terms of the stimulus? Something you have talked about how important it is, especially for individuals, for small businesses, people who are just kind of at the end of their ropes. So how do we get that and then get a record on Wall Street, at least with the NASDAQ?
I think because Pelosi and Graham have jumped in on this and basically backed it, Graham actually, even more important, obviously, a powerful voice in the Senate and a Republican, may twist McConnell's arm to either back it or at least put it to a floor vote where I think enough Republicans will go along so it'll pass. So I think that's the way the market's looking at it. They're looking sort of past this. As for the motivation, one of the scenarios that people are talking about, and they think, because he's thrown Mitch under the bus with this. He's really backed him into a corner.
I was going to say, they apparently aren't having scotch at the end of a night and talking about what's going on.
No, earlier this week, McConnell recognized Biden as president-elect, which irked the president. who still obviously is, even as of today, claiming the election was a fraud and he won. So to put, I don't know if this was the actual reasoning, of course, but some speculating that by saying go big or go home once again, knowing the Democrats would back him, would put pressure on McConnell and the Senate to at least comment on it. Now, if he comes out and doesn't bring it to a vote and goes against it, may actually seal the deal for the Democrats in Georgia.
So,
which means potentially early next month we get an even bigger deal. So that's where the markets are looking.
Right, Republicans are not liking what they saw from President Trump last night.
They didn't even like the $900 billion, right?
No, and now Trump wants more money in direct payments to Americans, and the Democrats are pretty much saying, "Yeah, where do we sign up?"
I believe we said that back in August, June, July.
Yeah, exactly. Vince, why did we not see markets react even in extended hours last night significantly to this? I mean, this surprised me when I saw this video.
I thought the markets were going to sell off.
I did.
I did too.
Well, and initially I think they did a touch,
a little bit,
but I think again, the thinking is that this has more potential than not. And when you're cutting checks to individuals, you're cutting checks to the lower income individuals who either have no income due to losing jobs or the supplemental income, which basically this is going to be spent immediately.
It goes right into the economy.
Big fueling to the economy, likely will contribute to earnings a little bit faster pace, and overall, lift equity markets, lift earnings. Longer term, I think it really means not quite a lot because $2,000 is not going to last more than a month at best for most people.
Right.
And so they definitely need to do more. The more is going to depend on how we play out in Georgia. But increasingly more people are voting early in the race in Georgia, and that played out favoring the Democrats for the presidential election. So pundits are thinking that this is favoring the Democrats. It's favoring Biden not having his hand tied behind his back. And there's speculation, if that goes through, the stimulus bill will be in excess of what Pelosi asked originally. So you could be looking at a north of a $5 trillion stimulus bill.
But I do wonder too, Vince, if what's going on too is Trump helping out or trying to help out the Republicans in Georgia specifically by saying, no, we really want more money. I don't know. I don't know if that's part of it.
It is possible. It's totally possible. Some have argued that as well. Some have argued that they don't even know what he's thinking about, and that he's almost in a crash and burn mode. The end of the day is the more he tweets about the fact that the election was a fraud, the more he actually hurts Republican chances, because that doesn't really stimulate his base to go out to vote. It actually stimulates them to stay home. Yeah. And it angers the Democrats to even more to go out and vote,
right?
Which works against him. And I think that's kind of the way the market's looking at it, as that inevitably, if this swings full on blue wave, that the stimulus going into the first quarter potentially could at least equate to the dark winter that we're looking at in terms of virus spread.
All right, going to leave it there. Hey, Vince, I'm off tomorrow, so have a really good Christmas, and I'll be talking to you maybe next week. So you take care. And I do want to mention a headline crossing. Republican Senator Patrick Toomey saying that the president should sign this stimulus package. I just lost my headline. I think he's speaking on Fox News, so making some comments there. But we will see. We'll see how this works its way through. Hey, listen, coming up, we've got a great show ahead of us, including we'll hear from Dr. Anthony Fauci speaking to Bloomberg, also Dr. Bruce Farber over at Northwell Health. Speaking of the vaccine, Tim, it is this week's cover story. It's about the miracle on ice.
Yeah, Drew Armstrong, a fantastic story from senior health editor Drew Armstrong on that.
Yeah, I mean, he's really just been our go-to voice, or one of our go-to voices when it comes to the pandemic. So lots to get to in just a moment. We do want to mention the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day, one number that tells us a lot. Here it is, 36 million. Oprah selling most of her holding in the OWN cable channel to its majority owner Discovery for more than $36 million in stock.
Oh, it must be nice.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, Oprah.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, Oprah. All right, let's get a check on world and national news. For that, it's over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hello there, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Doctors on President-elect Joe Biden's coronavirus advisory board are sounding the alarm on what is likely to happen in the new year with the virus and how Americans can stay protected. Dr. Celine Gounder, a member of President-elect Joe Biden's COVID-19 advisory board, tells CBS this morning we need a more aggressive vaccination program.
We're certainly going to have to ramp up vaccination and do many more vaccinations per day. In the first week or so, we did not get to 1 million vaccinations. We need to be doing 1 million vaccinations per day.
Pfizer and partner BioNTech have agreed to double the supply of their COVID-19 vaccine to the U.S., raising totals for that vaccine up to 200 million. Well, healthcare workers and nursing home residents have been vaccinated, many of them to be followed by other priority groups, with availability to all comers by mid-year. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has that side of the story.
Nearly 2 out of 3 Americans say they plan to be vaccinated. Dr. Anthony Fauci hopes that number will be even higher.
If you get anywhere between 70 and 85% of the population vaccinated, which could really get the level of virus so low that it would not be a threat. By the time we get to the end of the summer, I think we can get the overwhelming majority of the population vaccinated.
Dr. Fauci said in a Bloomberg interview he would not be surprised if the new strain sweeping parts of Britain is found in the United States, or even that some new strain develops among the thousands of Americans being infected every day. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. It is Wednesday, as I keep calling it.
Feels like
Christmas
Friday,
Eve.
though.
I know. Why is that?
I think because tomorrow, for so many people, they're off. There's like, we were talking yesterday, it doesn't feel like Christmas. Are you off tomorrow?
I am off tomorrow.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm actually taking it, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great.
I'm looking forward. I need to get a little Christmas cheer in my heart.
I'm not off.
You're not.
But it's a short day.
But it's a short day.
Yeah.
It is. It's a shortened trading day. In the meantime, we'll be all over still kind of all of these viruses, all the virus headlines. We have New York City enforcing their travel quarantine. Surprise, surprise. Not expecting, I think, watching what's happening over in the UK and other places, just worried about this variant of the virus and just trying to get control.
I'm so surprised by the number of people who are traveling right now. And
What
I'm
are
not
the
just
numbers?
talking.
Is it like?
Well, I'm not even talking about like the packed airports and the reports
Just in
of
general?
airlines filling seats. I'm talking about like people I know who know about this virus who are still traveling to spend time with family. And, you know, they are taking precautions, but they're still flying to these places and they're around people they don't know. And it's surprising to me, given what we saw on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is why, I was taping stuff for our weekend show, and it was like that long, dark winter. It's upon us, but I think it's going to get even worse, especially because of what happens over the holidays. So listen, we're watching that. We're seeing, more and more people getting vaccinated. I mentioned to you, I kind of threw it at you because it just popped up on the Bloomberg. Washington Post has a story that's algorithms are deciding who gets the first vaccine. Should we trust them? And it just talks about frontline workers at Stanford Healthcare, some that were passed over, and it was apparently algorithms deciding who was to some extent at the front of the line.
Oof.
I know.
Hard.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess there's scoring systems, right? We've talked about these. I mean, everybody's trying to figure out. That is one of the biggest conversations I'm having in general in my personal life, even at work. It's like, okay, so when are we able to get the vaccine? Like, how does it work?
Right. One thing that I've loved to see in recent days are my friends who are frontline workers getting the vaccine. And I have 3 friends who've gotten it already, and it's just great.
It's the way it should be.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business
From
Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. NASDAQ at a record, S&P pushing higher. Stocks are gaining as investors appear to look past the possibility of a delay in pandemic aid. After President Trump demanded changes to the package Congress approved this week, the S&P is up 19 points right now, off session highs, but close to it, up by 0.5%. S&P for the year up 14.7%. To put that in context, NASDAQ up 43%. The Dow advancing today by 250 points, up by 0.8%. 10-year down 12/30 seconds. 10-year yield creeping up to 0.95%. Gold up 0.6%, 1872 the ounce. And a rally for crude. West Texas Intermediate up 2.5%, now 48.18 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, much appreciated. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, along with Bloomberg Quick Take anchor Tim Stenovic. And this was definitely what I like to call a wait what moment. People who know me know I do this all like, wait, what? And I'm guessing it had many Democrats saying, wasn't this what we suggested months ago? We're talking about President Trump's surprise attack last night. We got the news, Tim, on basically saying, wait a minute, I'm not comfortable with this $600. That's supposed to go to most Americans.
I think a lot of Republican lawmakers were really surprised too.
That's what, and this is what I want to get into. Like, were they, what was happening here? Let's bring in Bloomberg News White House correspondent Jordan Fabian on the phone from Washington, D.C. So, Jordan, where were you when that headline crossed?
Well, I was just sitting in my home office wrapping up some odds and ends.
That's what you thought. Wrapping up.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I was like, oh, dinner's coming soon. Not so fast. And that's when the president put his video on Twitter.
Unbelievable. So what are we, first of all, did this really truly catch Republicans all on surprise or by surprise? And I should say the House GOP to hold a call at 3 p.m. about the next steps on stimulus, a headline just crossing. Were they completely caught off guard?
Yeah, to my knowledge, this took even people on the president's own team by surprise. I mean, you had Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin, who was the president's chief negotiator on this package, just praising the bill just hours before the president put out this video. I'll note, too, that many of the president's senior advisors are out of town right now for the holidays. So the White House kind of thin-staffed, the president by himself, also meeting with some of these conservatives from the House and from outside who've been egging him on this effort to overturn the election. And it's possible that, this stimulus package and their objections to it came up in those meetings as well and influenced the president.
So what's the likely outcome here, Jordan? I mean, what happens next? What happens now?
Well, that's the $900 billion question, right? And it's hard to know because the president really hasn't said if he's going to veto this or not. So we're all kind of waiting to hear if he intends to follow through on his threat to not sign this bill. He hasn't really given us any indication yet, but I'll note that there's some key deadlines coming up. Unemployment benefits, the expanded benefits are expiring on Monday, and benefit and the funding for the federal government is also expiring on Monday, and that's a key part of this package too. So you have all these deadlines coming up, not to mention all the Americans who've been just eager to have this aid for months now.
I don't even know what to ask you because I feel like I'm just kind of blown away by this. What's interesting is this is largely what Democrats were pushing for months ago, right? A larger individual payment.
Yes, and this speaks to the fact that the president himself wasn't really personally involved in these negotiations. And he could have, if he wanted $2,000 checks, he could have raised this at any point during the talks, and he didn't. And he sort of left his negotiators to agree to the $600 amount. And then after the pie is fully cooked, he comes out and says, well, I don't think this is enough as far as the stimulus checks go. So it's not really how the negotiation process is supposed to work, to say the least.
So could the government get shut down in a couple days?
Yes, if the president doesn't sign this measure, it's possible the government funding would lapse on December 28th, and if there's not some kind of short-term stopgap or this bill doesn't become law, then there would be a partial shutdown of government agencies.
Which is, okay, so what would that mean for the fight against the pandemic?
Well, that's a really good question. It kind of depends on what the administration's guidance is, whether they can designate that maybe as an emergency function and allow it to continue. But as we've seen, even under those circumstances, when certain functions are able to go ahead during shutdowns, it's not quite fully staffed. There's a lot of people who aren't working or not allowed to work, so it could add some complications to the process, which is already, I would say, suffering from some hiccups as far as the vaccine distribution goes.
So, is there a realistic chance that the American people could actually see better benefits here from this stimulus? And I'm not just talking about these direct payments. I'm talking about other elements of it as well, because it's not just these direct payments that will or will not happen depending on what the president does.
Yeah, no, Tim, you bring up a good point, which is that there's been this almost myopic focus on the direct checks. And while that's important, this bill has a lot more in it, which is money for school reopening, money for vaccine distribution, those expanded unemployment benefits we were talking about, loans for airlines and small businesses who really suffered because of all the shutdowns and restrictions. And so if this package doesn't get approved in one form or another, all of that goes away, and the country is left shorthanded economically in the response to the pandemic.
All right. So what are your expectations? Your bosses said what? Jordan, really sorry. I know we're coming up on the holiday, but you're going to keep working because we're expecting stuff through the weekend. I'm just curious, what kind of guidance are you getting from your team, but also from maybe from Washington?
Well, yeah, I'm just about to fly down to West Palm Beach, Florida with President Trump, where he's supposed to spend Christmas. And it's sort of a curious move, right, to kind of nuke these talks and then jet off for a holiday weekend down in South Florida. But all the indications are that the trip is a go. So right after I'm done with you guys, I'm going to get into a car and head to Andrews Air Force Base.
Well, have a safe flight. It seems like you are going to be working during that time. I just want to end with this brief 3 martini lunch part, because that was a surprise to see in the video. Yeah. And the president, like his one other demand was, we need to extend this for more than 2 years, which was really surprising to me.
This was a special issue for him. I mean, this is really important to him.
But it makes no sense because you're not going to go to a restaurant if COVID exists.
Right, exactly. Which just shows he's kind of thinking about things very differently, right, than everybody else. You're absolutely right. Like that to me came out of the blue. So something we're following, no doubt about it. Jordan Fabian, thank you so much. Wish you well. Safe travels as well. Bloomberg News White House correspondent. I do want to mention another headline. SEC Chairman Jay Clayton to step down today, just looking like he sent a letter, I believe, to the president. I'm just finding it. December 23rd, recently submitted a letter to President Trump informing him that today would be my last day as chairman of the SEC. And so, yeah.
Him and Attorney General Bill Barr.
That's right. Oh, right. Exactly. A lot going on. All right. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio right here. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, I'm going down a rabbit hole because I've done some research on, presidential pardons, and I'm reading a story in the National Geographic right now. Presidents have 4 kinds of pardon power, only applied to federal crimes. We know that.
Wow, I did not know that.
You didn't know?
Well, I knew it was only federal. I didn't know they had 4 types, though.
I didn't either. 4 kinds of pardon power. So.
Yeah, the states is a different issue, and that's for what Trump should be concerned about.
Well, and we're going to get into the most recent pardons. Of course, that coming in late yesterday as well. Justin Sink of our Bloomberg News team. We'll get to him in just a second. Right now, though, we'll never have to pardon him, I think. Here's Charlie Pellet.
All right, here's what's going on. Let us begin with by repeating an earlier headline, and that is that the SEC Chairman Jay Clayton will be stepping down today. Stocks are pushing higher right now, off session highs, but still looking at records on NASDAQ and the Russell 2000. Let's begin there because the NASDAQ Composite Index is up 21 points right now, up 0.2%, 43% higher for all of 2020 on NASDAQ. S&P's up 19. That is a gain of 0.5%. The Dow up 240, up 0.8%. I mentioned the Russell 2000 record there, up today by 0.9%. Stocks are higher for the first time in 4 days as investors look past President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. The pound is gaining as an outline of the post-Brexit trade deal was reached. S&P 500 index being led higher by energy and financial sectors. 10-year yield right now 0.95%. Gold is up 0.6% at $18.71 the ounce, up $11 the ounce now, and West Texas Intermediate crude rallying 2.3%, $48.12 a barrel. Pfizer and partner BioNTech have agreed to supply an additional 100 million doses of their COVID-19 vaccine to the U.S. as the country seeks to widen its immunization program and revive its economy. The agreement brings the total number of doses to be delivered to the U.S. to $200 million. This update brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. Well, the vaccines continue to get rolled out across the United States. Lauren Sauer is an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And on Bloomberg Television and Radio this morning, she told us that rollout has been spotty.
I think given the supply chain challenges and the distribution challenges and the fact that each state is sort of determining the process on their own, we are seeing different levels of success across the country and across the globe. And I think one of the keys is going to be, as we get more vaccine online and into the hands of vaccinators, continuing to send that message that this is safe, this is effective, you want it, you should get it, and that we can do this successfully. That'll be key.
And the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Checking some of the vaccine names, Pfizer, they're all higher, by the way. Shares of Pfizer up now by 2.1%. AstraZeneca up by 0.3%. Moderna up 3.2%. On the minus side, turning negative. Shares of BioNTech, they are lower now by 0.6%. Again, recapping, equities higher, S&P up 19, gain there of 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, appreciate that update. So President Trump in his waning days, maybe not so waning, in addition to disrupting the virus relief package, he's been hard at work issuing a slew of pardons, Tim.
And he's still got a month left.
He ain't done, is what they say. So let's get into it, find out exactly kind of what he's up to and what maybe is to come. Justin Sink is following it all for us at the White House. He is White House reporter at Bloomberg News, and that's exactly where we find him on this Wednesday. Hey, Justin, nice to have you here with Tim and myself. So here they come. My understanding is that there's some kind of Excel spreadsheet about all of this. First of all, just generally, were you surprised a little bit that some names trickled out last night, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. We had heard that the president had wanted to do some of the pardons, and we're expecting more and more pardons as we get closer and closer to the end of his presidency, and that's something that has happened with every president dating back to George Washington. But he had wanted to do some of those before the Christmas holiday. I think what was more surprising was the names that were involved, and there were a couple buckets that I think made people kind of stick their heads up. One was a group of 3 former Republican congressmen, all of whom had been convicted of various financial crimes. And, you know, the White House didn't even necessarily provide justification for why the president felt like they should get out of their prison sentences beyond the fact that they were former lawmakers. Another group that was kind of interesting was former employees of Blackwater who were involved in this shooting of civilians in a traffic circle in Baghdad back in, I think, 2007. Was a huge international incident, caused a bunch of diplomatic problems, and they were convicted in the U.S. of a number of crimes like manslaughter and murder, and the president went ahead and freed all of them. Then there was a couple former campaign aides or allies of his campaign who had been convicted of lying as part of the Mueller probe. And despite having admitted to the FBI that they misled them about their statements, the White House went ahead and pushed them out.
I think I was kind of struck by the similarities between Chris Collins and Duncan Hunter, two of the Republican congressmen who Trump pardoned yesterday. They weren't just, serving, or not serving yet, but they weren't just, hadn't just been convicted or pleaded guilty to these financial crimes, but at the same time, they were among the earliest supporters of President Trump. And I wonder, Justin, how much loyalty could be read into here.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that President Trump has shown with his pardons and commutations throughout his time in the presidency. Joe Arpaio, who's the sheriff in Maricopa County, Arizona, an early supporter of the president, was pardoned pretty early in his term. But, Collins is sort of a great example. He's somebody who was literally at the White House when he committed his crime. He was emailed.
There's video of that.
Yeah, he was emailed information about a drug trial, hops on the phone, calls his son, tells him to sell shares with that inside information, saving his family over $500,000. And so it really served to kind of underscore the fact that, President Trump hasn't been shy about the fact that he's willing to pardon and protect his political allies. And I think that feeds the question you asked earlier, which is whether we expect more of these to come. There are certainly more allies of President Trump who potentially could ask for and receive a pardon.
Presidential pardons, as we know, Justin, are normal. President Trump's, though, less so. Is it fair to make that assessment?
Yeah, well, I would say this. Normally, when presidents do sort of politically motivated pardons, it's at the very end of their term. So, you think about Bill Clinton and pardoning Democratic donors, pardoning his brother, those sorts of unique things. It's something that President Trump has really done throughout the entirety of his term. And so he's been less bashful about doing it. I will say that in this group of pardons, there were sort of ordinary people that were highlighted by Alice Johnson. She was the woman who Kim Kardashian actually lobbied the White House to free on a nonviolent drug charge. And so there was a group of sort of more normal pardons in this announcement last night.
Justin, thank you so much, and we should all check out your story at Bloomberg.com. Justin Sink of Bloomberg News. All right, Nancy Lyons, over to you.
Thanks, Carol. President-elect Joe Biden continues to fill out his cabinet, introducing today his pick for Education Secretary, Connecticut Education Commissioner Miguel Cardona. Cardona, whose grandparents moved from Puerto Rico to Connecticut, is another high-profile Latino in the cabinet. Biden says Cardona understands the importance of public education.
Dr. Cardona rose up the ranks to become an assistant superintendent in the same school district he attended as an English learner student. The same district where he was born in public housing. The son and grandson of parents and grandparents who moved from Puerto Rico in search of new opportunities.
Cardona says he's bilingual and bicultural and as American as apple pie and rice and beans. Biden is vowing to reopen schools in his first 100 days in office. Well, there's a big drop in expected holiday travel this year. AAA is projecting a nearly 30% decline. Andy Post is a senior advisor to the Transportation Security Administration. He tells Bloomberg around 1 million people a day have been flying in the past week.
We're still below half of what we were at this time last year. On the highest day in 2019, the highest day ever actually was in 2019, and we had 2.7 million people come through in a single day.
He also advises all airline passengers to bring food with them, since many flights are not serving meals. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. And don't hate me, everybody. Our producer, Aria Agami, is going to be like, what are you doing? But there is a great story that's on the Bloomberg. I sent it to Tim. I'm going to send it to Ari so that our folks on YouTube know what we're talking about. But it's by the Washington Post, and it asks the question, algorithms are deciding who gets the first vaccine. Should we trust them? And it gets into a story about frontline workers at Stanford Healthcare apparently were passed over for the first wave of coronavirus vaccines, and officials at the hospital blamed the, quote, very complex algorithm it had built to decide employees' place in line.
And there were demonstrations about this. I saw images from the university hospital where frontline workers were basically saying, hey, wait a second, why are we the ones not getting the vaccine? And you guys who are not on the front lines are the ones who are getting it.
Right.
And now we know it's because of the algorithms.
It's funny, my husband and I had a conversation about, I think somebody was a dentist or something, and we're like, is that really frontline workers? Like,
I guess it depends on your definition of it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think I can see that easily being a frontline worker because you're working on people with their mouths open. You don't know what their status is.
Right. But you don't have to be, I guess there's emergency dental work, as we know. You and I have been having kind of an offline conversation.
Which is that I have not gone to the dentist in a year.
And I'm like, go, you're crazy, because you're going to create some health problems, potentially. So we know that there are complicated algorithms often underneath the internet. We know it in the financial world. Stanford's system, actually just a basic formula, simple enough for an Excel spreadsheet. A breakdown of the algorithm sent to medical residents and first published by MIT Technology shows that its real error came from the humans who had designed it, namely prioritizing employees based on age rather than their exposure to the virus at work.
Yeah, and that's what you have to remember. Behind every algorithm is a person.
Correct.
And that's why algorithms can have biases. And in this case, that's bias that we saw was favoring age over what exactly they were doing.
But it's something, Tim, to keep in mind that as governments and workplaces are beginning kind of their vaccine rollout, many are turning to those similar algorithms and different types of scoring systems. So it's just something to keep in mind in terms of those pecking orders that are being created. Just another interesting part of COVID-19.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks look to snap a 3-day losing run. Stocks higher for the first time in 4 days as investors look past President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. S&P up now by 16, close to session highs, up by 0.5%. The Dow's advancing 234 points, up 0.8%. NASDAQ and the Russell 2000 both at records. NASDAQ up 16, a gain of 0.1%. Russell 2000 up by 0.9%. 10 years down 12/30 seconds. 10-year yield 0.95%. Gold up 0.6%, 18.71 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.1%, 48 even a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, 2020 has been a year of so many wrongs and wrongdoings. It's a year that Bloomberg Business Week reported earlier this year would be a lost year, and that indeed it has. And yet, amid all of the loss, heartbreak, and confusion, and living through a health pandemic, the likes of which was the worst than we've ever seen in our lifetime, something actually went really, really right this year, Tim.
It did. We got a vaccine.
We did indeed, and that is this week's cover story. Bloomberg News U.S. healthcare team leader Drew Armstrong with us on the phone in Atlanta, along with Bloomberg Business Week editor Joel Weber on the Access line in Brooklyn. Great headline, and I love the cover, Joel, the miracle on ice that is, or that are, the COVID-19 vaccines.
Yeah, and congratulations to Drew on his first cover story. It turns out, which is great for him.
Yeah.
So yeah, so much has just gone terribly wrong this year, and I think we all recognize that. And this is our good business issue, and it was a chance to actually reflect on a few things that actually were remarkable, and not least of which is what the vaccine represents, which is this Herculean undertaking that was, coordinated from multiple places. I mean, you had government doing something very right in this regard, but also, scientists who were basically doing their job and doing it really fast. And that was sort of what we turned to Drew about and said, by the way, let's just step back and marvel at what was just achieved here. We had never seen a vaccine come to fruition this fast. Can you help us kind of put a bow around that? And ultimately, that bow looked like dry ice with a little vial of liquid. And no, it is not real vaccine juice. But Miracle on Ice was the cover line.
I don't know if that's the
and Drew,
we
did try. We did try to get the real bottle, right, Drew?
Yeah, I mean, we were, I know, calling around the evening before the photo shoot, seeing if anybody would give us a empty, to be clear, bottle of Pfizer's vaccine, which was being used most heavily at the time. Unfortunately, no luck on that.
Kind of glad they didn't, because I'm hoping they're using the vial for the vaccine. Just going to put it out there, guys. So tell us about, though, this story is remarkable because one of the big things that you point out, Drew, is that the science was there. We were very lucky that the messenger RNA science was already in the works for several years.
Yeah, this is a technology that has been kind of kicking around in the biopharmaceutical world for a number of years, and people have always thought it held a tremendous amount of promise. It essentially the idea is that it turns cells into little protein factories, and so you can kind of turn them into little mini drug manufacturers themselves, which is great theoretically, but it hadn't really delivered in a big way yet. Moderna is probably the most out in front company with this, but there had long been this idea that you could use it to rapidly make vaccines in a pandemic because of the speed with which you can design and begin producing these things. A lot of flu vaccines, people don't know this, they're essentially grown inside eggs. It is, and it can take quite a long time to actually develop and test these things. But the mRNA vaccines, they were designed in just a couple of days after Moderna and the NIH got a copy of the virus's genetics downloaded from China. So it's remarkable how fast this can happen, and this technology getting things out front as quickly as it did.
I was shocked to read that Drew, that it took only a couple of days. So when it comes to vaccine development, where does the time hiccup? Is it the clinical testing? Is it the actual manufacturing of it? Where's the bottleneck?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something I actually had a wonderful conversation with Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar about. He's a former Eli Lilly executive who worked there in the drug industry for a long time. And one of the things that we talked about in our discussion, and this is common throughout the pharmaceutical industry, is that when you're looking at laying out hundreds of millions of dollars or eventually billions of dollars potentially to bring a drug or a vaccine through trials, you don't do everything at once. You do the initial preclinical work, and then you pause and you look at the results and you say, okay, let's go ahead to phase 1. And then you do that work, and then you pause and you go ahead and you say, okay, let's go ahead to phase 2. And so on and so forth up through clinical trials. And then you need to start thinking about, okay, we need to build manufacturing. How much do we need to build? This is a long process with a lot of consecutive steps. What happened with Warp Speed was essentially it took all of those and compressed them all down kind of into one big race from the word go. And it said, okay, we're going to build manufacturing. At the same time, we're going to run the phase 2 and phase 3 trials. We're going to arrange for pre-purchase deals for these things. Basically, compressing steps that typically would take years and years and years to do, partly because of the risk and high chance of failure involved with drug development, saying, do it all at once. And we'll put a bunch on the line here. Most of the drug companies involved were part of that program, Operation Warp Speed, to do that. Pfizer was not technically, but did very similar work in terms of compressing its timelines and was still first across the line here.
So it's also worth mentioning that one of the other significant things that makes it worthy of the good business issue here, Drew, is that a year ago, pharma wasn't known for saving the world. It was better known for things like Purdue Pharma, which obviously played a part in sort of the epidemic that we've seen in opioids. Also, Martin Shkreli. So, how big of a redemption moment does the industry believe this to be?
Yeah, I find this to be hilarious. So there's this Gallup poll that comes out every year of how people think about various business sectors and do they have positive or negative views of them. And actually, the two bottom on the ranking, the only places that have actually majority negative views among the American public are the pharmaceutical industry and the federal government. And that is who teamed up to actually get this done. I think if you're the drug industry, to go from being kind of, the face of, gosh, you guys have been attacked in Congress for high prices. I mean, just everything under the sun, to have that be your reputation and then turn into, hey, these are the guys who are going to save the world. That's about as big a turnaround as you can possibly imagine. And it really is a credit to the science expertise and the business expertise and the kind of combination of all those factors which have had, a pretty rough knock over the last couple of years. But getting those folks all aiming at the same goal as quickly as possible, it shows you what is possible when you take all of those resources and aim them at the right target.
I also just reflecting on life a year ago. It made me realize that, Drew, a year ago right now, Business Week published a cover story about SoftBank, which was a gigantic, the image was a gigantic pile of money on fire. It said "Season's greetings from SoftBank," which at the time had just been on the other side of the WeWork debacle. And I'm realizing that we had a year ago a fire on the cover, and right now we have Miracle on Ice. So the year has been a song of fire and ice.
Totally. And I'm just going to say there's a line in the story about Drew and his family in their midsize SUV trying to keep their bubble and stay away from COVID. Anyway, it's a great read. We'll put it out on Twitter. Our thanks to Jill Weber and Drew Armstrong. It is the cover this week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this Wednesday, December 23rd. NASDAQ is at a record, as is the Russell 2000. Stocks now off session highs. The S&P up 16, a gain of 0.5%. NASDAQ up 10, at a record, up 0.1%. The Dow up 218, up 0.7%. Stocks are higher for the first time in 4 days as investors look past President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. The pound gained as an outline of the post-Brexit trade deal was reached. Right now, we've got the 10-year down 10/30 seconds, 10-year yield 0.95%. Gold up 0.6%, $18.71 the ounce in West Texas. Intermediate crude up 1.9%, $47.94 a barrel. There hasn't been much good to say about the labor market, and that is the story again today. Weekly jobless claims dipped for the first time in 3 weeks, but remain elevated at 803,000, roughly 4 times higher than before the pandemic. Factory orders for durable goods moderated in November, rising 0.9%, half the prior month's gain. A barometer of business investment also moderated. As for the consumer, Diane Swunk is chief economist at Grant Thornton.
We've seen a shift in consumer behaviors. Not only are they less skittish than they were in the spring before we ever had lockdowns where they pulled back ahead of that, they've been actually somewhat jubilant in the response to the vaccine. We're seeing in behavioral economics a study that shows that people are actually more risk-taking because a vaccine is out there, even though that is making contagion worse.
Oil is advancing after a decline in crude inventories injected optimism into a market that is reeling from the resurgence of the pandemic. Among some of the oil names, ExxonMobil up today. ExxonMobil up by 1.7%. BP shares up 3.5%. EOG Resources up 2.9%. Pioneer Natural is rallying by 4.8%. Recapping, S&P 500 index up 17 points, a gain of 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, I'm going to just tell you that Carol Masser, first of all, along with Bloomberg Quick Take anchor Tim Stenovec. Tim, this story has really been our most read story all day until Brexit kind of squeezed it out a little bit, and then we had Governor Cuomo coming out and extending the eviction ban in New York. So obviously important stories, but this story is fascinating in that it talks about the year that was when it comes to Wall Street. And it's been, earlier in the week we talked about a story that great year for Wall Street, but not a great year for humans. I mean, that has been a big theme here.
Yeah, can you imagine back in March thinking that this would be a great year for Wall Street?
No, not at all. And it's really pretty remarkable on a day when we see the NASDAQ at another record. This story that's on the Bloomberg, it's by the dynamic Bloomberg News team of Max Abelson, Sally Blakewell, Shaheen Nazarpour, and Kathy Burton. So let's get into it with Bloomberg News finance team leader Sally Bakewell. She is on the phone in New York City. Sally, I'm so glad you could come on to talk with us about this, because it is really one of those things that we keep scratching our head about and talking about kind of that disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street. So tell us about the reporting that you guys all did.
Hi, thanks for having me, Carol and Tim. It's really interesting how this story pulls together so many different parts of Wall Street. We have the credit markets, which led to, the ability of companies to access them and pay themselves dividends at levels not seen for years. We have trading profits because of volatility in the market. We have the SPAC boom. And hedge funds, of course, and even some consumer-related companies like mortgage providers. They've all been able to ride this wave. And part of the reason is because of the unprecedented stimulus that the Federal Reserve provided to the market in March to avoid financial catastrophe. But as well as lifting, the credit markets, it also had a knock-on effect of bolstering the stock markets, because they saw that, the mass insolvency of lots of companies was off the table. And so anyone that was able to kind of access the markets in this way was able to benefit. And of course, that contrasts that, as you said earlier, with the experiences of the average American, and It's very different. Their stimulus checks have run out. They're facing far less far fewer options when it comes to finance.
How much credit here goes to Jerome Powell?
So much. Right?
I think so much, but I won't try and hit that beautiful high note.
I don't know where that came from. I'll never do it again. And that was just so random. Anyway, go ahead, Sally.
Yeah, no, total credit, and credit is due because, admittedly, this helped avert so many companies succumbing to bankruptcy because they couldn't get much needed liquidity, which of course saved jobs. We keep that in mind, that he indeed did help avert financial disaster. But the monetary policy solutions that the markets got were perhaps not matched by the fiscal stimulus that the Americans got.
Yeah, I mean, especially not today.
Right,
we saw from,
especially not today.
Yeah. I do wonder about lessons learned from the financial crisis, and if there were any quick lessons learned from the financial crisis and why that Jerome Powell and the Fed acted so quickly with stimulus. What can you tell us?
I think that's precisely what happened. They acted faster and to a bigger magnitude because they saw how the financial crisis, the last financial crisis, went down, and wanted to act in ways that ensured that didn't happen again. And I think, as we quote Schenkman Capital Management executive in this story, who says, well, when the Fed steps in, investors have seen time and time again that there is a way to profit. They buy the dip, and this is happening again here, and they've managed to profit from it in one way or another.
I love the story in that, you guys, as always, just including some kind of unbelievable statistics. You talk about the 5 biggest U.S. investment banks, J.P. Morgan, B of A, Citi, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, now set to post their first $100 billion year for trading revenue in more than a decade. And then you also talk, by the end of the year, Americans will have taken out a record $4.4 trillion worth of home mortgages. I have a sister-in-law, Darlene, who works in the home mortgage business, and she's like, they have been so crazy busy. I mean, it's just kind of off the charts, right? And then same thing when you talk about the IPO market or the SPAC market, it's just been kind of one woe statistic after another.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a year of these crazy dichotomies, and you mentioned mortgages. While that we're seeing records in the sort of mortgage sales, we're also seeing records in terms of, defaults on them. So it's kind of these strange things are happening at once, which is the essence of this story. You've got these, and the optics are not great. You've got Wall Street profiting, you've got Americans suffering and not doing so well, and the overall vibe from that is not a good one, and in a year of the pandemic. It is a very stark kind of conclusion to draw in 2020.
Right, and there's lots of money that big, publicly held companies have been able to access really cheaply, and then they're able to go back and basically, buy back their stock, which just boosts their share prices. There's a quote I just have to share with everybody, or at least a line in this story. Expectations are so high that a trader who got $2.5 million last year has vowed to leave one of the nation's biggest banks if he doesn't get significantly more for 2020. So that's
a bonus.
That is a bonus. Yeah. Sally, amazing reporting. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Bloomberg News finance team leader Sally Bakewell on the phone in New York City. I do wonder. I mean, listen, it's just. I don't have a problem with Wall Street firms making money and being really profitable. We need a healthy financial system. That is kind of the foundation of so much in our country. But I also think we've got to look at the rest of the jobs that are in our society and figure out how do we raise them up.
Yeah, I mean, this has K-shaped recovery written all over it, right? It's something that we've talked about for weeks. And it really comes into stark relief today because of the lack of action from Washington.
Right.
But it shows that it's been unequal.
And interesting to see, all these people, people who could afford to take out mortgages or buy homes, and then you've got so many people facing evictions at the same time. So it's really hard to kind of get your head around all of that. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg. Let's get back to world and national news. Back over to Nancy Lyon. Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is planning a vote tomorrow on new legislation boosting stimulus payments for individuals up to $2,000. And she's urging Republicans to join Democrats in meeting a last-minute demand from President Trump that's thrown the latest pandemic relief package into doubt. House GOP members are said to be holding a conference call at this hour. Well, the U.S. now leads the world in COVID-19 vaccine shots administered, with more than 1 million doses given in the 10 days since the first vaccines were cleared for use. This is according to the CDC. And more doses are on the way from Pfizer and BioNTech. As Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports, they're doubling their supply to the U.S. just as distribution of the Moderna vaccine rolls out.
The Food and Drug Administration is closely monitoring vaccine development, Commissioner Stephen Hahn said in a Bloomberg interview.
There's a multi-pronged approach. One is working with the developers of the vaccines still in development to help get them through the clinical trials, and then also working with the manufacturers of the 2 authorized vaccines, so making sure that there's a high quality of manufacturing, which we believe there is.
Hahn said side effects remain rare but are being treated, and career scientists are in charge of evaluating the vaccines. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
President-elect Joe Biden has introduced his nominee to serve as Education Secretary, Miguel Cardona.
Like other cabinet nominees and appointees, he's brilliant, he's qualified, and he's tested.
Cardona currently serves as head of Connecticut schools. His grandparents moved from Puerto Rico to Connecticut. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, along with Bloomberg Quick Take anchor Tim Stenovic. And listen, in any market, a booming one, a bust one, there's always opportunities to make money. And we're watching kind of the market from very different angles. The debt market is always an important one to watch. And this story by John Gittleson of Bloomberg News is tracking what we're seeing in terms of, he writes, private credit funds sitting on about $196 billion for U.S. commercial real estate deals are poised to pounce as struggling property owners seek loans to ride out the pandemic. This is basically, some of those credit funds that are going to be looking for distressed debt situations or the opportunity to pick up some debt purchases here and maybe get it at a bargain.
Right. We talked about this a couple of days ago when it came to commercial real estate in New York City, and the idea that there are people out there right now who are trying to take advantage of the depressed prices here,
Totally.
residential real estate.
Right.
We are seeing this play out in multiple places because these companies and the owners have been so hard hit by the pandemic, they're looking for funds, and those with dry powder can actually pounce and potentially get a good deal, and it shows that 2021 is going to be busy in this arena.
And we know that there's a fair amount of capital out there. It's been that way, like kind of going into the pandemic, whether it was private equity money, whether it was different, types of funds that are out there. And what this story says, and I just want to throw out some numbers, about $430 billion in commercial and multifamily debt, more than half of which is held by banks, is maturing in 2021, so next year, with fresh capital needed to head off basically what they say is a tsunami of default. So that's where the opportunities lie.
Yeah, banks are looking to unload shaky debt, and owners of struggling offices, hotels, and retail properties are resisting selling at distressed prices. Private credit funds are expecting a busy year with plenty of opportunities to put that capital to work.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too, and especially if the market starts to kind of improve in general. We'll see what kind of debt plays we see ultimately. But listen, it's been an interesting market generally with rates so low. It has provided the opportunity for companies to borrow a lot of money again, for some individuals, and that's why you've seen the home market so strong. But this is certainly one to watch when it comes to 2021. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovic right here on Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We begin with a headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. President Trump is defying Congress and has vetoed the bipartisan defense policy bill. The president calling the policy bill, quote, a gift to China and Russia. Repeating, President Trump defies Congress and vetoes the bipartisan defense policy bill. Now, let's head right over to the First Word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks in the green right now, with the Dow currently up 222 points. The S&P's gain 18, while NASDAQ climbs by 19. The U.S. 10-year yield at 0.95%. Gold is up 10, and transports gain 85 points. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, only real estate and tech were in the red, and leaders to the upside in the Dow, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Disney, while Salesforce and Microsoft led to the downside. After earnings, paychecks reversed 3% gains, and in other news, the CDC said that more than 1 million people in the U.S. have gotten vaccine doses. Wrapping things up, Nikola fell as much as 11% after losing an order from Republic Services. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill. Have a happy holiday and to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg. Type Squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. This is Bloomberg Business Week on this Wednesday. Carol Massar along with Bloomberg Quick Take anchor Tim Stenovic. And this week in the upcoming issue of Bloomberg Business Week, economics editor Peter Coy gives us something to think about when it comes to a company's responsibility to multiple stakeholders and taking into account things like ESG factors when it comes to business and investing decisions. Bottom line, he says, backlash against prioritizing anything other than profit. So let's get into it with Peter. He joins us on the phone in New Jersey. I'm so glad you were able to come back today because we touched upon the story, Tim and I, with you yesterday, and then got interrupted by, I believe, President-elect Biden.
You got Bidened.
You got Bidened. So tell us about this story. I think it's a really thoughtful one, especially when I feel like there's been, Peter, so much momentum, so much conversation about a company has to think about multiple stakeholders. So take it away. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly true that ESG investing is on the rise. There's a survey by Deloitte that found that something like 26% of professionally managed assets in the U.S. had ESG mandates as of 2018 versus only 11% in 2012. That's a pretty rapid increase. And, as you said, it's engendering a backlash. And we're seeing it in the Trump administration. 3 different agencies have taken shots at ESG in different ways in the final months of Trump's term in office. Now, Biden may try to reverse some of them, not all, but in any case, it represents, obviously, the Trump administration is doing this because they're feeling some heat, and that's probably coming mostly from corporate America that is resisting some of the ESG mandates.
So in corporate America, where is the backlash coming from? Because I thought ESG was all the rage right now.
Well, it's true. It's a mixed picture, I think, and that's a fair point. There are a lot of companies that are totally on board with ESG, but in some cases, they just don't like being pinned down. They want to have sort of the freedom to do it their way. Well, anyway, to give you some examples, the most stringent restrictions on ESG are coming from the Labor Department, which makes a certain amount of sense because the Labor Department is in charge of pensions. And naturally, pensioners are vulnerable to bad investing, and they're relying on that money for their retirement. They really don't directly have anything to say over where the money is invested, so the Labor Department sort of bends over backwards to say that the money should be invested only according to pecuniary considerations, money, not ESG. The ESG could be used only if there's 2 exactly equal investments from a profitability point of view. ESG could be the tiebreaker, and they expect that to be a rare situation.
So it's interesting. There's a line in your story, Peter. A cynical take on ESG is that it's a way for CEOs and boards to avoid accountability. If profits come in below expectations, they can point to some wind farm as an explanation, like, hey, we did the right thing, but it hurt profits.
Right, yeah. So I have a quote in the article from a woman named Barnali Chowdhury, who's at UCL in London, kind of on this point, saying, you don't want ESG to be sort of a get-out-of-jail-free card for companies, to just wave your hands and say, we're answering to multiple stakeholders, not just shareholders.
Well, I think about Jamie Dimon, right, at the Business Roundtable, and of course of J.P. Morgan. When he made that statement about, listen, companies have to have multiple stakeholders. I think everybody was like, yeah, it's shareholders, it's employees, it's your community, it's a lot of things that we need to think about. But I do wonder, ultimately, if you're a publicly held company, right, ultimately you still answer to your shareholders.
Yeah, well, Carol, this is such a deep issue. We could talk about it all day long because there's so many nuances here, but there is that argument. But then the argument of the ESG people is, look, shareholders could collectively decide that they want some objective other than just making money. They collectively want to do something about climate change, for example, and the argument would be, fine, if that's what they vote, they choose a board of directors that wants that, if they vote in proxies for that kind of thing, then they're certainly entitled to.
So is Milton Friedman right here, right? The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is it's a very clean storyline, the Milton Friedman one. What I'm getting at is that there's a lot of ambiguity in corporate law, and maybe that's not an entirely bad thing. Maybe we need to learn to live with a certain amount of ambiguity. And I tell the story of going back to Barnali Chowdhury citing a 18th century play called Servant of Two Masters, the servant named Truffaldino, who somehow manages to, by scrambling left and right, serve two different masters, and fairly ably as well.
Yeah, and I guess, time will tell in terms of how well companies kind of juggle both of this. Peter, it's like just a great historical account. I love how you start off with Henry Ford and what he did originally. It's just a great way to kind of talk into it. I was kind of teasing this for our weekend show, and I said, this is something that you can discuss virtually with your friends and family during the holidays, because I do think it's just a bunch of great talking points for
us. Lots to chew over, yeah, there really is.
With some nice red wine. You just got to kind of throw that in there.
And maybe over Zoom, too.
And virtually, absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
Got to do it safely. Peter Coy, have a safe holiday, a good holiday, and we'll talk to you hopefully maybe next week, or if not, definitely, of course, in the new year. Bloomberg Economics Editor Peter Coy. This story is in the current issue of the magazine, hitting newsstands, online, and on the Bloomberg. But it's just, right, we've seen, Tim, such a huge wave when it comes to ESG, but I do feel like companies are trying to figure it out.
Right, certainly a buzz term when it comes to millennials, too, right?
Totally.
Thinking about where they're putting their money, not just when they're purchasing, but when they're buying companies' stock, too.
Right, and I'm going to say, as an investor, I don't mind giving up a little bit of performance to kind of do the right thing. I think it's a good thing.
You're here.
This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, along with Bloomberg Quick Take anchor Tim Stanovic. You guys played some of, or a lot of the interview from Dr. Anthony Fauci that David Weston did.
Yeah, that's right. And look, it's funny. I was thinking when I was introducing him, I was thinking to myself, this is a man who these days needs no introduction, right?
I know.
If
Or
there's sort of
you
one
hear his voice a little bit.
You know who this guy is.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Madonna or an Oprah. We just say Fauci. All right, we're going to hear from him in just a moment. First up, though, back to Charlie Pellet with a check on the trading day. 29 minutes to go, Charlie.
Indeed, green on the screen. Records right now for both NASDAQ and the Russell 2000. Got to stay tuned to Bloomberg Radio to find out how things shake out. And, of course, what happens to Asian markets tonight. Right now, the S&P is up 16, up 0.5%. In the year-to-date column, 14.64% on the S&P as the year winds down. NASDAQ up another 10 today, up 0.1%. Record there, up 42.9%. Dow in the year-to-date column up 5.9%. Right now higher by 207 points, up by about 0.7%. Stocks are higher for the first time in 4 days as investors look past President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. The pound gained as an outline of the post-Brexit trade deal was reached. The 10-year 0.95%, gold up 0.5%, 1870 the ounce, and crude rallying today by 2.1%. WTI up $1 a barrel, 48.03. Pfizer and partner BioNTech have agreed to supply an additional 100 million doses of their COVID-19 vaccine to the U.S. as the country seeks to widen its immunization program and revive its economy. So how long until there will be a wider vaccine rollout? That question this morning for Lauren Sauer, who's an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
I think somewhere in late Q1, early Q2, we'll start to see the public get vaccinated routinely. I think the focus really on the supply chain is going to be ramping up not just production, but all those pieces that you need to get the vaccine safely into the hands of people who can give it to people, right? So the dry ice, the freezers, all the cold chain storage issues, the glass vials, even things like gloves and masks, we're going to need to keep an eye on to make sure that all those steps can be done safely.
Indeed, lots of moving parts. The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the vaccine names, Pfizer up 2.1%, BioNTech lower now by 0.2%, AstraZeneca up 0.2%, Moderna higher now by 3.4%. Recapping, S&P up 15, a gain of 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, appreciate that. Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, you know who he is. He spoke to Bloomberg's David Weston earlier today. They talked about the vaccine rollout and Dr. Fauci's own vaccination. In this excerpt, Dr. Fauci talks about the timetable for getting all Americans vaccinated. Check it out.
We all know you got vaccinated yesterday, so you've actually had the vaccine. I think most people want to know, today, how are you feeling? Are there any side effects?
You know, I really feel really fine. For at least 5 or 6 hours after the injection, I didn't feel anything at all. I mean, less so than a flu vaccine. Then a late afternoon, early evening, I started to get a little bit of an ache, really nothing to distract me or bother me, but just something that when I press on it, you could actually feel it. Had a good night's sleep last night. I didn't get, a lot of muscle aches or anything. I mean, I felt something a little different, like there was something going on, like maybe a little warm, a little flushed. Woke up this morning, I feel perfectly fine. The only thing I have now is that where the injection site is still is a little sore. But when I say sore, I mean really not very distractingly sore, just baseline, borderline.
If there are side effects, how quickly would they kick in?
They usually all occur within the first 12 hours, and they last between 24 and at the most 36 hours. It's extremely unusual for someone to have something beyond 36 to 48 hours.
Now, you said in getting your inoculation, it was for two reasons. First of all, you are a physician. You were actually treating patients. But secondly, you wanted it to really represent to people that this truly is safe. We don't need to be worried about it. Do you have a sense that there is much resistance at this point in the vaccination program?
You know, it's getting better, thank goodness. When we did surveys, a month or so ago, there was almost 50% of the people had some reservations or skepticism about getting vaccinated. The last survey, which was just last week, they said that more than 65% of the people said that they would be willing to get the vaccine. We really want to get that up even much higher than that, because the projection is that if you get anywhere between 70 and 85% of the population vaccinated, you would create an umbrella of immunity over the community, which could really get the level of virus so low that it would not be a threat. And then you could answer the question that everyone seems to be asking appropriately, is that when can we start approaching some degree of normality? When can we be doing things like safely having the children in school, or going to a restaurant and sitting indoors, or going to a movie theater? I would think if we start getting the general population vaccinated, let's say mid-April, between now and then, we're going through the various priorities. We started off healthcare providers and people in nursing homes and long-term facilities. The second level is people over 75 and individuals in what's called necessary or important places in society to keep society running. And that could be anything from a police officer to a fireman to someone who runs a grocery store so people can get food. When you get through those priorities and you get to what I call open season, like anybody can get the vaccination, even though you're not in a priority group, I imagine that's probably going to be sometime in April. And then if we can really get vaccines going in April, May, June, July, and August, by the time we get to the end of the summer, I think we can get to that goal that I'm talking about getting the overwhelming majority of the population vaccinated.
All right, that, of course, was Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease doctor, catching up with our Bloomberg news anchor, David Weston. That was earlier today, talking about the vaccine rollout. And specifically, though, and I know, Tim, every time anybody's talking about, like, what did it feel like? What did it feel like afterwards? And Dr. Fauci talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, he gave, like, the most detailed answer you could ever imagine. It was sort of the most clinical answer that you'd expect from a doctor. It was, like, 30 seconds of exactly how it felt. And I think there's a point to doing that, though,
I think so, too.
He used the word distracting a couple times. He said it wasn't distracting, and I think that's a really good way to think about it.
Have you ever gotten something from a doctor, like some procedure, something like, oh, it's a piece of cake, no problem, and then the next day you're feeling terrible, and you're like, wait a minute, if you just told me so I knew what to expect. And I think that's what he's doing, to really understand it. And you see people getting it left and right, and it's like a normal vaccine, like a flu vaccine, it feels like.
Keep it coming.
With a bigger needle, I'm just going to say.
But it's fine.
By the way, Mayor Muriel Bowser proclaiming Thursday, December 24th, Dr. Anthony S. Fauci Day in Washington, D.C. Tomorrow, by the way, Dr. Fauci's 80th birthday. Wow. I hope I look as good.
Happy birthday, Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, totally. Let's get back to world and national news. For that, back to Nancy Lyons, she too in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. President Trump is following through on his threats and has vetoed the annual defense policy bill. The measure passed the House and the Senate by a veto-proof majority. Trump opposes a measure in it that would rename military bases named for Confederate generals, and he wants a liability shield for tech company that's removed. President Trump now says he supports stimulus checks more than 3 times higher than those in the $900 billion relief package. Democrats are essentially saying, great.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has scheduled a Christmas Eve vote on what President Trump's calling for $2,000 direct payments rather than the $600 in the pandemic relief bill. In a letter to Democrats, Pelosi says if the president's serious, he should call on Republican leader Kevin McCarthy to agree to pass the increase with unanimous consent. Pelosi also says the president should sign the stimulus and spending measure so the government won't shut down after Monday night. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
House Republicans are said to be discussing their options this afternoon. President-elect Joe Biden's pick for education secretary has his work cut out for him as many public schools remain closed during the pandemic. Biden introduced Dr. Miguel Cardona during the event today in Delaware.
I know how challenging this year has been for students, for educators, and for parents. I've lived those challenges alongside millions of American families. Not only in my role as state education commissioner, but as a public school parent.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. This is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser, along with my co-host, Bloomberg's Quick Take anchor, Tim Stenovic. And this story, this is just kind of par for the course. This is about Clorox, and apparently they're planning an additional way to keep shelf stocked this new year, rolling out more pocket-sized packs of disinfecting wipes. Disinfecting wipes for everyone.
I saw Gerald Porter Jr. tweet this today, and I retweeted it, and I said, it is a Christmas miracle. Because these have been so hard to come by.
Oh my God! Even in my house, didn't I tell you? I think on air even there was at one point during the early days of lockdown we couldn't get anything, and we actually made our own. We took like an old mason jar, got some Clorox bleach, put some.
Oh yeah, you told me about this.
Some
you did homemade wipes,
handy wipes or whatever in there, and like kind of made.
Well, those days are over, and you can now carry these around with you.
Hallelujah! No, but listen, there's a great story that was in the magazine recently, just talking about. I think it was Lysol specifically.
Yeah, that was
all
a Drew
about,
Armstrong piece.
Right. That was just about the production and keeping up and making sure that there was enough for everybody.
Who would have thought that this year would be the year that demands totally outstrip supply? I think one interesting element of this piece is it hasn't just been good for sales, but they're thinking about margins differently with these smaller packs. They appear to have better margins because they come in this 9-count pack, cost 11 cents a piece, while they're less than 8 cents a piece in a 35-wipe canister, according to Gerald's reporting. Because you don't want to be carrying around those 35-wipe canisters, right?
No, it's not really convenient. I mean, we have them all around the office, right? Like we see them, but we all want those little packs that we can just pull one out when we need it. So it's kind of interesting. But it's also like you talk about the strategy. Clorox, I guess, to deal with all the demand, cut its range of wipes products of 14 from more than 100 earlier this year. And so, lower priority items like compostable
wipes,
I never said that right. Compostable wipes. So they're like kind of weeding out the things that I guess weren't necessarily in demand and focusing on those that were.
The only ones we could get back in March, Carol, were like this terrible scent and we only had 2 packs. We made them last 2 months. And my wife was, when we finally got rid of them, I was like, finally, we don't have the scent anymore.
It's like, were you worthy of a wipe today? Like, why could you do it?
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell, and we have got stocks trading close to session highs. It is a record, though, for the NASDAQ Composite Index, also the Russell 2000. Right now, NASDAQ is up 10, a gain of about 0.1%. Russell 2000 up now by 1.1%. S&P up 16, up 0.5. The Dow's up 217, up 0.7%. Bottom line, green on the screen, but off session highs. Stocks are advancing for the first time in 4 days as investors look past President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. 10-year yield 0.94%. Gold up 0.6%, 18.71 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.3%, 48.10 the barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the drive to the close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, just about 11 minutes left into today's trading session, getting ready to wrap up this day of Wednesday. Time for the drive to the close. Dave Donabedian is Chief Investment Officer at CIBC Private Wealth Management, $74 billion in assets overall and under management, and he joins us on the phone once again from Baltimore. Dave, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Listen, it's a tough time, as we know, as we're getting through this next wave of COVID. And I do wonder, though, we continually talk about this disconnect between what's happening on Wall Street versus kind of the rest of the world, especially with, once again, a relief package on hold again because of the president. How do you see the market environment right now, and what do you anticipate how it carries over into 2021?
I think the market environment is really focused on kind of continuing to do the great look-through, which is to kind of define 2020, looking through all of the short-term distress related to COVID and social unrest and a divisive election, and looking to the impact that both fiscal and monetary policy are going to have out in 2021, which we think is going to lead to actually a very strong spurt of activity in the economy and in corporate earnings. So to us, that's the big picture. In the short term here, I do think that this $900 billion fiscal package will get passed. If you kind of play out the situation the president's in, he wants more for working class and middle class Americans, but if he doesn't sign this bill, they will get nothing.
So
ultimately, it's likely to happen.
Well, it's so interesting, Dave, to hear that you're optimistic about fiscal policy here, because it took so many months for members of Congress to reach this $900 billion deal, only to be told last night, thanks but no thanks, by the president. What's the optimism that you have about members of Congress working together in a Biden administration to actually get something done and help the American people who've struggled so much?
Well, I think at first, I think this $900 billion dollop will happen, and I think it's not gotten, in a sense, that much attention in the markets. It's almost like if something isn't in the trillions anymore, it's just viewed as a rounding error. But this is going to be, hundreds of billions of dollars front-loaded into the economy in the first quarter. So it's going to help us get off to a good economic start, even with the COVID surge going the wrong way. As to whether there's another fiscal support package with a new Congress and a President Biden, I think that's much more open to question. First, I'm not sure that it will be needed. But secondly, I do think you're going to see a lot of the Republicans in Congress, even though they've presided over very significant budget deficit increases the last 4 years, kind of revert to their deficit hawk mode as a way to blunt Biden's more fiscally active.
Yeah, we haven't heard mention of that over the last 4 years, have we?
No, exactly. What's the responsibility, though, Dave? I mean, this is the problem we keep having and talking about, is the disconnect between what we're seeing between Main Street and Wall Street. One of our most read stories on the Bloomberg, it's a virus update, but it talks about Andrew Cuomo of the state of New York, extending the eviction ban. There are a lot of Americans. We've talked about it. Bloomberg has reported on kind of the fiscal cliff that so many Americans are facing, whether it's being able to stay in their home to feed their families, employment benefits coming to an end. I mean, what's the responsibility, though, of kind of our investment world and our corporate world to really make sure that the rest of the population is taken care of?
Well, there's a high level of responsibility, and we've all seen numerous examples of the disconnect between the day-to-day economy and the financial markets. I think what we all need to realize is that can go on for a while, but it's ultimately unsustainable. And if we have an economy that's not growing and significant parts of the population going backwards, not forwards, that will find its way into lower asset prices and a less stable society.
Unpack that, because I think that's a really important point. It's just like we talk about ESG and climate change, and ultimately, big public companies, they've got to embrace, because these things are going to impact them financially ultimately. So unpack that for me a little bit in terms of how this disconnect will ultimately find its way into asset prices.
Well, I mean, if we go into well, put it this way, before this likely additional fiscal stimulus package, we were looking potentially at a GDP decline in the first quarter, meaning a reversal of the improvement we've begun to see in the job market and consumer spending and investment and so forth. So the absence of policy could make a huge difference here, and so that's still going to be a big part of the discussion and the debate in 2021 with a new president and a new Congress.
How does your outlook change for next year if Democrats gain those seats in Georgia and get control of the Senate?
Yes, I think it's not a binary impact on the markets, and that if that scenario happens, you'll have a 50-50 Senate, and yes, Vice President Harris breaking ties, but think about how narrow that is to get things done. So I think I would still say, if you look at the campaign agenda that Joe Biden laid out, you have to roll that back by on the spending and the tax side by many trillions in terms of what could get done, even in a 50-50 Senate. What I would look to first, if you do get that outcome and the Democrats win both of those seats in Georgia, I would look to the bond market actually before I'd look to the stock market. You may see more of an impact in bond yields going up on the expectation of a more fiscal activity going on in the course of 2021. Additional fiscal support is not necessarily bad for the stock market. It was pretty good, I think we can all agree, in 2020.
Right. I mean, we just did a story about, it's one of the most read on the Bloomberg, about kind of Wall Street and just the different financial firms that have benefited big time in different corners, whether it's traders, whether it's, the SPAC market or SPACs specifically, whether it's home mortgages. As you get ready to wrap up the year, one investment thought to maybe leave our listeners with. Just got about 30, 40 seconds here, Dave.
Yeah, I would just say looking to next year, we had a 30% rise in the stock market in 2019. We're going to do 15 or 16% this year. We think that stocks will outperform bonds and cash again next year, but with probably more of a single-digit return environment, because valuations are a little bit stretched. But it should be another year in which stocks lead the way.
Yeah, especially with all this easy and cheap money out there. Hey, Dave, thank you so much. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Dave Donabedian, he's Chief Investment Officer at CIBC Private Wealth Management, $74 billion in assets under management, on the phone from Baltimore. I mean, I think it's safe to say the Fed has definitely, Tim, signaled that it's going to be easy money. I mean, they've talked for several years at this point, and they're willing to let the economy run a little bit hot if they need to make sure that the job market can get back on track.
Yeah, that was certainly a highlight from last week's press conference, and also the message to lawmakers that Jerome Powell basically was like, hey, I've done what I can. Now it's your turn.
Right. And he's been kind of beating that drum for a while.
Yeah.
All right. You're heading home?
Heading home.
Okay. And I'll see you next week or in about a week or so.
Yeah. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
Same to you. Be safe. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Late session slump. NASDAQ ends with a loss. The Dow, the S&P, they both push higher. Folks from J.P. Morgan Asset Management virtually ringing that closing bell. Turned out to be a mixed session, but really in the final few minutes of trading saw quite the sell-off. S&P, though, higher for the first time in 4 days as investors look past President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. Now, moments ago right here on Bloomberg Business Week, Dave Donabedian, Chief Investment Officer at CIBC Private Wealth Management, talked about the outlook for stimulus.
I think this $900 billion dollop will happen. And, you know, I think it's not gotten, in a sense, that much attention in the markets. It's almost like if something isn't in the trillions anymore, it's just viewed as a rounding error. But this is going to be, hundreds of billions of dollars front-loaded into the economy in the first quarter. So it's going to help us get off to a good economic start, even with COVID surge going the wrong way.
In the end, though, turned out to be a losing day for NASDAQ. Had been trading at a record, but ended the day with a loss, down 36, a drop today of 0.3%. S&P up 2 points, little changed, up less than 0.1%. The Dow up 113 points, higher by 0.4%. 10-year down 8/30 seconds, 10-year yield 0.94%. Gold up 0.6%, 18.72 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.2%, 48.04 for a barrel of WTI. Oil advanced after a decline in U.S. crude inventories injected optimism into a market that is reeling from the resurgence of the pandemic. Nikola slumped after losing an order to supply sanitation heavyweight Republic services with 2,500 battery electric garbage trucks. Latest setback for the troubled startup. We saw shares today plunging by 10.7%. Recapping late day fade. NASDAQ down 0.3%, S&P up 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Whoa, yeah, what I say.
Nobody move a muscle.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and shakers.
Damn, Stiffy, you got some moves.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everyone. Time to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the Wednesday trade, the Wednesday close. It's a holiday shortened trading week. We know that we're going to close early tomorrow. But as for the equity trade on this Wednesday, we did take a little bit of a leg down. I want to say in the last 10, 15 minutes of trading. So ending, as Charlie mentioned, flat on the S&P, Dow up about 113 points. But both of those off their highs of the session. Same thing for the NASDAQ, but still down about 36 points. S&P 500, we had 307 names higher in the index today, 197 lower, one unchanged. And if I check on my Bloomberg, take a look at the major industry groups in the S&P 500 for the day. Quick bringing them up. 3 were lower. Bottom of the pack, real estate down almost a full percentage point. Top of the pack, energy, which has often been either at the top or the bottom of the pack. Energy up 2.2%, followed by financials also rallying up 1.6%. Let's get to Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Sarah Ponzak, who always does some digging into the market with some great analysis. Sarah on the phone in New York. So where shall we begin?
Well, like you said, we had this almost strange selling into the close, really the last 10 minutes of the day. And I've just been breaking up the S&P 500, looking at the last 10 minutes in particular of the trading. And it does look as though a majority of the selling came in the tech sector. In the last 10 minutes alone, we saw about a 0.5 percentage point sell-off in that sector. But it was broad. We saw all sectors headed lower in the last 10 minutes of the trading day. It's really important to keep in mind that we are seeing low liquidity, thin trading. You look at the S&P 500 today. Today, volume was about 20% lower than what it's been on average over the past 100 days. We are surely in holiday trading, thin trading. I'm sure we'll only get lighter in the half day tomorrow. And then, of course, we're off on Friday, Christmas. But looking around for some headlines, not yet seeing anything in particular. But just important to remember that we are really facing thin holiday trading right now.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. What a strange little day. But you're right, it's thin, and it doesn't take much to maybe move the market at this point. And I do think it's going to be, as you said, even more of that yesterday. I also think, we're in this kind of weird place where we thought stimulus was done. the second relief program to help those impacted by the virus, and then all of a sudden, of course, put to a stop by President Trump late yesterday. I think there is, though, still an expectation, because that was kind of the trade today, that there would still be something done.
Right. There is an expectation. Mostly investors were looking at this from President Trump as maybe deal-making, possibly bluster, really accepting the fact that it is very unlikely that he is actually going to go ahead and veto the stimulus bill. And we saw that trade take place throughout the day. We saw energy and financials leading. Even with the late day sell-off, energy still closing up more than 2%. Financials closing up 1.6%. We saw small caps once again leading today. The Russell 2000 today still closing up 1% higher. Really the majority of the week, all of the week, we've seen the Russell 2000 close higher. So we continue to see the cyclical rally take hold. And it was a turn from what we saw yesterday. Remember, yesterday we saw tech lead the way. We saw the cyclical rally take a bit of a backseat. Well, today we saw the continuation of that trade that has really taken hold much of this quarter. So cyclicals, once again, value in the lead and small caps in the lead too.
Yeah, I was just looking at our Markets Live blog. Russell 2000 posting the best performance among equity indexes in that light pre-holiday trading. Listen, I do wonder too. You know, we know the markets are a discounting mechanism. They are forward-looking. I guess we're going to just have to see how things start to settle in come January, Sarah, when it comes to the virus, the trends, the numbers, and also the stimulus, especially when the Biden team gets into the White House. What kind of fundamentals will equity investors kind of be dealing with this year?
Right, and that's exactly the point. I spoke to Dave Donabedian over at CIBC.
He did too.
Investments. And he's great, but he had a great phrase. He said that the markets are looking through this dark winter, and they're looking ahead to really all these different factors that are pointing to what could be an accelerating economy, accelerating earnings, and there is data to support that. If you look at earnings estimates right now, for 2021, now expecting growth of around 22% compared to a 16% decline this year. We continue to see analysts really raise their expectations for 2021. We've seen now an increase in those expectations for 10 straight weeks. Now, of course, there are still concerns over the vaccine. There are concerns over the virus, especially this new strain. Could that dent that picture? But right now, there really is budding optimism for the year of 2021, that we will see a bounce back, that we will see the majority of what was lost in profits for corporations completely recouped. If you look at that dollar amount that's expected for S&P 500 corporations in 2021, but there is a lot until we get there. But right now, the consensus really is that we will see that bounce back.
I mean, listen, Sarah, we can see it, right? That if things start to turn the corner, if the vaccines are really spread out, and there's more and more people take it, and we start to get, toward that herd immunity, you can see how the economy could open and how it could really bounce back pretty dramatically. But, talking about Dave Donabedian, what's interesting too is my concern too is about this disconnect between, there's been a lot of people though impacted negatively. How quickly will they bounce back, especially those who've been waiting for another relief package from Congress and the U.S. federal government? I do wonder, how quickly do those people get rehired? How quickly do those people, get their jobs back and are able to kind of, get back some of the ground that they lost, the economic ground?
It adds to that the fact that we might see a productivity increase, but that might not mean a quick labor market bounce back. I read a really recent research note from Goldman Sachs economists recently, and they were pointing out the fact that they do think that productivity is going to increase, but part of that reason is the fact that many industries that are labor heavy, that really rely on factory floors, that rely on human capital, that those are changing their business models, that they're lightening up on human capital, focusing on automation to really speed things up. So what might be good for corporate profits isn't necessarily what is good for the economy.
Right. And there's, as people transition, as people innovate, as they adopt, more strategies that maybe eliminate some workers, it's going to be uncomfortable for some time. And those workers, it'll take some time to catch up. Sarah, thank you so much. Be well. Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Sarah Ponzak joining us on the phone in New York. Let's get to world and national news. For that, we head out to San Francisco and Ed Baxter. Hey, Ed.
Hi, Carol. President Donald Trump is not leaving quietly, using a veto muscle today on the defense bill that was widely supported by both Republicans and Democrats. And then, of course, his Twitter video shooting down the relief package. This really boxes in his own party leaders who haven't said what they want to do. The problem pointed out by Vice President-elect Kamala Harris.
The challenge was, as even the speaker said, they didn't get any feedback from the president. I know that Democrats certainly wanted to get more relief than the $600.
Yeah, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has urged the president to press on the GOP now to get the 2,000 checks. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is going to have to figure out what he's going to do. Donald Trump hasn't had a veto overridden in his term. New York has come out very strongly today about enforcing a quarantine for travelers coming from the UK.
We are going to have sheriff's deputies go to the home or the hotel of every single traveler coming in from the UK.
Meanwhile, NIH Director Dr. Anthony Fauci says he'd like to specifically sample the variant strain from the UK, but he tells Bloomberg's David Weston on Balance of Power that viruses do mutate.
So the fact that you have the emergence of this mutant in the UK really tells us that sooner or later we're going to get more mutants.
But he says they have seen nothing to date that changes the functionality of how the vaccine will work. The governors of New Jersey and Massachusetts both saying today that COVID-19 spikes were caused by people not acting responsibly over Thanksgiving, and they want just household gatherings for Christmas. In the nation's hottest area right now, California, Governor Gavin Newsom says ICU beds are quickly filling up. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. This is Bloomberg, and this is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio. Joining me right now is Charlie Pellet of Bloomberg News, well-known voice and personality to Bloomberg Radio. Story, we got to talk about this. David Baker of Bloomberg putting this out. More than 600,000 Californians face a Christmas Eve blackout, as if things couldn't get more difficult for anybody across the country, but those in California, where we know those virus numbers are pretty difficult.
Indeed, and we're talking, and just to be clear, we're talking because we have a lot of listeners in and around the Bay Area.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, we're talking about Southern California here. Edison International, which is the Southern California utility, cutting power to about 17,000 customers, warning another 165 may follow as wind speeds increase. Sempra Energy's utility serving San Diego is warning that may need to switch off electricity to about 31,000 customers, or about 90,000 people. And to your point, 2020 has just been a lousy year, just absolutely. And for the people of Southern California, no shortage of people elsewhere in California who have dealt with wildfires this year, of course, but the problems persist in Southern California. Typically, this is the wettest time of the year. Not happening this year because of El Nino.
Yeah, exactly. In the Pacific Ocean, it has shifted weather pattern specifically. So LA has not seen the rain that they typically see at this time. And so once again, the fire danger is pretty high. So LA International Airport has had only 0.11 of an inch of rain since October, according to the National Weather Service. All of California abnormally dry, and drought covers more than 95% of it, Charlie, right now, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, and that's why it's making everybody nervous.
And this is a very familiar story to people throughout California when utilities cut off power, but perhaps worth explaining too for our international listeners elsewhere across America. Utilities, the reason why they cut the wires is that this way there's no chance of their lines then sparking greater fires if and when winds pick up and blow down some of those live wires.
It's exactly explained so well, and it's something we have seen certainly before in the state. All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Appreciate the assist. You are listening to Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. A late session fade today. NASDAQ retreating from a record. NASDAQ tumbled 36 points, giving up gains. Indeed, traded much of the day in record territory. End of the session with a loss of 0.3%. S&P, though, eking out a gain, up for the first time in 4 days, even as uncertainty surrounded President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. S&P up 2 points, up 0.1%. The Dow up 114, up by 0.4%. 10-year down 9/30 seconds. 10-year yield 0.94%. Gold up 0.6% today, 1872 the ounce, and crude rallied 2.2%. WTI up $1.04 a barrel at 48.06. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week on this Wednesday. I'm Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio. Earlier, you heard our David Weston catching up with Dr. Anthony Fauci, talking about Dr. Fauci actually getting the COVID-19 vaccine and talking about that experience and a little bit more about where we are when it comes to the coronavirus. Great to have with us once again also a really smart voice and one of our go-to voices when it comes to COVID is Bruce Farber. He's Chief of Infectious Diseases at Northwell Health, massive hospital and healthcare system in New York State that has seen so much when it comes to the virus, and also was where the first vaccination happened last week. I believe it was the Pfizer vaccine at the Northwell Health System. Dr. Farber joining us on the phone from Manhasset, New York. Dr. Farber, nice to have you back with us. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell me a little bit about the vaccine rollout, how it's going at your hospital system.
It's going well. It's going to take a while. It's a massive effort. So far, we have vaccinated a fairly large number of people. I believe it's approaching, 2,000 or so. We're rolling it out to priority groups, nurses on the front line, custodians on the front line, ER workers, hospitalists, pulmonary critical care people working in the COVID units, and it's going well. It's just a time-consuming process, and then eventually we will roll it out to the general community.
You say time-consuming. What do you mean? You mean in terms of the administration of it and keeping track of it and just finding the right people to make sure that the priority people are getting it, or what?
All of those things. It's done by appointment only. People cannot walk in. There has to be social distancing. The patients, the people who are being vaccinated have to be observed for 15 minutes. They have to be observed for 30 minutes if they've had a history of a severe allergic reaction to another product. And that all just takes time because, and as you know, this vaccine is very unforgiving. The Moderna vaccine is only good for 6 hours after it's been thawed, and the Pfizer vaccine for a little bit longer, but has the horrible freeze chain associated with it. So all of these factors make this totally different than, influenza at a drugstore.
Yeah, very different. Have you gotten the vaccine?
Yes, I have. I got it last week.
And what was your experience in getting it? That was one of the things that we were kind of intrigued listening to Dr. Anthony Fauci to talk about the process and how it felt.
Well, quite frankly, I was delighted. I couldn't wait to get the vaccine. I can't wait to get the second dose. To me, it's an amazing vaccine. The efficacy is much better than any of us had anticipated. And as you know, living in New York or anywhere in the United States, COVID is all around us. There's no question about it. So the vaccine itself was much less painful, and my side effects were trivial. They lasted 6 hours. I took Tylenol. I felt a little, malaise, and that's it.
Right. And if you take a shingles vaccine or some other vaccines, you can feel that as well, if not worse. What's interesting is, though, we were having kind of internal discussions here around our news table in our studio of just this whole idea, this was off air, but just it's kind of staggering how what we've had to endure the last 9-10 months because of COVID, and yet there are a lot of people and even members of the medical community who are hesitant, especially in the Black communities, that are hesitant about taking this vaccine.
No question about it. I mean, that's a big problem, and we need to communicate very well. As I have said before, there are many loud voices against the vaccine, and there have not been enough voices pro-vaccine. But this disease is affecting the African American community in a disproportionate manner. They have more cases, higher mortality, and many more comorbidities that make the prognosis worse. So I think it's essential that we gain their trust, and I think we need to reach out to them, and we are in the process of doing that at Northwell, and I think more and more needs to be done. You're absolutely right.
Well, what are you doing in terms of reaching out? And I'm just curious because there is, as you know, because of the history that we've seen with the Black communities in the past, with syphilis in terms of really being treated poorly by the medical community. So I'm just curious, how is that outreach going? I was talking with the head of Morehouse Medical College yesterday, and she said, you know, there are studies out there that show that Black individuals and Black Americans want to be treated by Black doctors, and that's where they find it, you know, their comfort level, their efficacy in terms of treatment. So I'm wondering, how is that outreach going, and what are you guys doing to make sure that everybody who needs to get this vaccine really gets it?
Well, it just started, and the initiation is with community groups, with leaders in the Black community. A lot of them are in churches and other community groups, and the concept is, you know, we're starting there. So it's going to take time, but there will be an outreach in those communities. We will make it easy for people in those communities to get vaccinated. They will be physically near them. There's transportation issues, and there's a lot of work ahead of us to do that.
Right, exactly, to do that outreach. Just got about a minute here, and then we'll take a break and come back and talk some more. What are you seeing in terms of COVID cases right now?
There's a lot of them, quite frankly. Our census is slightly more than 1,000 at Northwell Health.
Wow.
That's dramatically higher than it was. It's, you know, close to 10 times as high as it was 2 months ago. It's not as high as the, 3,800 number that we hit in March, but it's very alarming, and quite frankly, it's a huge problem again.
Yeah, and as you know, as we all know, that it doesn't take much for what seems to be a manageable number to exponentially increase, and then it becomes unmanageable. Dr. Farber, sit tight for a second if you would. We're just going to do a little bit of news, and then we'll come back and continue with Bruce Farber, who is Chief of Infectious Diseases at Northwell Health, joining us on the phone from Manhasset, New York. And this is on a day where the CDC did come out and say that more than 1 million individuals in the United States have indeed gotten that COVID-19 vaccine dose. But as we know, it's 2 doses. And as we just heard from Dr. Farber, I thought that was really insightful, that, you know, it's appointment only, social distancing, and then, of course, everyone who gets the vaccine has to be observed for at least 15 minutes or longer, depending on any underlying conditions. We're going to get back to him in just a moment, right here on Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Yes, indeed. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. We're going to get back to our conversation right now that we're having with Dr. Bruce Farber. He's Chief of Infectious Diseases over at Northwell Health, and we'll get back to him in just a moment. I want to talk to him about that story, the cover story of Bloomberg Business Magazine about what the drug industry was able to pull off this year. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Back to, though, your top business stories, the world of business, and Charlie Pellet.
All right. I thank you very much, Carol Master, and happy Wednesday to you, by the way. Here's what's going on. Stocks up for the first time in 4 days. A late day fade, though, for the S&P, the Dow, and NASDAQ. NASDAQ, in fact, fizzled, ending the day with a loss. NASDAQ dropped 36 points, retreating from a record, down by 0.3% today. The S&P up 2 points, little changed, up by 0.1%. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average picked up 114 points again, well off session highs, up today by 0.4%. Even with today's swoon, NASDAQ for the year is up by 42.3%. 10-year down 8/30 seconds, 10-year yield 0.94%. Gold up 0.6%, 18.72 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.3%, 48.09 a barrel. Stocks did advance for the first time in 4 days, even as uncertainty surrounded President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. There has not been much good to say about the labor market, and that was the story again today. Weekly jobless claims dipping for the first time in 3 weeks, but remain elevated at 803,000, roughly 4 times higher than before the pandemic. As for the economic backdrop, Matt Miskin is Co-Chief Investment Officer at John Hancock Investment Management.
The economic data as of late, I think, is anchoring yields. You're seeing real-time economic data roll over. Bloomberg has some of the best alternative data, and it's globally, it's whether it's mobility, other, real-time data is really contracting. And I think that's providing an anchor.
The U.S. is trying to obtain samples of the mutant strain of coronavirus that has arisen in the U.K. for testing at the National Institutes of Health. That's according to Anthony Fauci, the government's top infectious disease doctor. He says the variant does not appear to make infected people more ill than other strains. Vaccine makers have said they do believe their shots will raise immunity against it. Among some of the vaccine names today, mixed picture after all. Pfizer shares up 1.9% today. BioNTech lower by 0.5%. AstraZeneca up by 0.1%. Talking about the ADRs here in the United States. Moderna, ticker mRNA, up by 3.5%. Recapping stocks mixed. S&P up 2, a gain of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. We are talking about COVID-19, getting the latest headlines through, and also talking about the vaccine and where we are. We're talking still with Dr. Bruce Farber, who is Chief of Infectious Diseases at Northwell Health. This on a day where global virus cases passed 78.1 million, deaths exceeded 1.71 million. Dr. Farber still with us on the phone from Manhasset, New York. So, Dr. Farber, I was getting ready for our weekend show, kind of planning for it, and it'll go out, between the holidays. And one of the things I wrote in the introduction was, we've been all predicting this long, dark winter, and it's really upon us, isn't it, when it comes to the vaccine, and really, rather, when it comes to the virus?
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I think we better double down on the options, the few options that we have until a large segment of the population gets vaccinated, hopefully by the spring. So I think we should be very careful. It's dangerous out there.
Well, and when it comes to, you said, you're seeing a lot more cases. You said, I think, 1,000 at Northwell, still below the peaks that we saw in the springtime, but nonetheless, a big jump in cases. What kind of cases are you seeing? Is it younger people? Is it more manageable cases? What do we know about kind of what kind of COVID cases we're seeing at this point?
Yeah, on a positive note, the mortality is much lower than it was in the spring. Our length of stay is much lower than it was in the spring, which makes us have more bed capacity. We have not had to shut down our essential services. People are doing better, and I think a lot has changed since the spring. We're smarter, more knowledgeable, have better protocols to take care of these patients. That's not to say that it's a different virus. It is not. And the patient population is slightly younger than it was in the spring, but not dramatically.
Okay, that's interesting. But it's still as lethal, correct? Or has the potential to be?
It certainly has the potential to be. Our death rates are much lower than they were in the spring. But yes, it certainly can be lethal.
In terms of the death rates being lower, is that because, as you said, you guys, we've talked about this a lot on air with you and with others, we didn't have a playbook. We didn't have a medical playbook. And so everybody was kind of learning as we were going. But now we have a little bit of a playbook in terms of how to treat patients differently and look at the cases. Is that fair? Is that why maybe it's not so lethal or the mortality rate is much lower?
Yeah, there's no question that there was a learning curve, not to mention the overwhelming demand and the terrible situation with the need to redeploy so many people. And so keeping it under control, knowing about better management of the airway, avoiding the ventilator with high flow oxygen and BiPAP, which we're now doing routinely now, proning, Decadron, remdesivir, anticoagulation, all of those things have significantly improved the way people are managed, and it's much more protocol driven than it was before.
So your understanding of how maybe the next month or so, maybe a couple of months look for us in terms of cases and dealing with it, and then as your understanding of further rollout and distribution of the vaccine, what are your expectations for maybe what spring and summer, or maybe summer is maybe more realistic for us to talk about, what it looks like for maybe the New York metro area, and maybe for the country overall?
Well, I'm hopeful that by the summer things will be dramatically better. I don't think that we're going to be rid of COVID anytime soon, and I still think people will be wearing masks in the summer. And I don't know what percent of the population will be vaccinated by then, particularly with many people still afraid of the vaccine. So I think it'll be dramatically better, but I don't think it's going to be gone. And I think we also have to watch these mutant viruses. This is an unpredictable virus, and I think every time we underestimate it, we get burned.
Did the news out of the UK, just got about 40 seconds left here, the variant, did that scare you a little bit?
Yes, quite frankly, it does. Anytime this virus mutates, it scares me. I think we'll be able to handle this one, and it certainly doesn't seem to be more virulent. It may be more infectious, and but you got to watch these mutants. That vaccine may need to be changed someday, hopefully in the distant future, but who knows?
Yeah, well, it's just kind of unbelievable, one headline after another. Thank you so much. I know your world is busy and crazy, and you've been so kind to always find time for us. So thank you so much. Have a safe and healthy holiday season. Dr. Bruce Farber, he's Chief of Infectious Diseases at Northwell Health. As I said earlier, a massive hospital and healthcare system in New York State. They have been dealing with this virus and situation from day one here in the New York metro area, and going to continue to do in this next wave. So Dr. Farber joining us from Manhasset, New York. Let's get another check on world and national news. For that, we turn things over to Ed Baxter. He is in San Francisco. Hi, Ed.
All right, Carol. Hi. How about a little good news? Well, looks very much as if the UK and EU are close to a Brexit agreement now. Earlier today, an outline was announced, and now the two sides are saying they have reached a compromise on the issue of fishing, which, of course, had been the major hang-up now for months. It includes a 25% cut in EU fishing quota and a year transition period. So hopefully they'll get it together. New York going ahead with its own plan to enforce quarantine on people coming in from the UK. Governor Andrew Cuomo says sheriffs will be sent to apartments and hotels to check, and then with a bit of a sour tone request.
United States, CDC, HHS, do something. Do your job on the way out the door.
Meanwhile, the nation's hottest area right now, California, Governor Gavin Newsom says ICU beds are filling on December 1st.
So 2006 to be exact. Today we have 3,827, almost double.
He says only household Christmas, please, echoed by Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker.
When we let our guard down, especially in group settings where precautions aren't being followed, the COVID spreads. We saw this loud and clear after Thanksgiving, when infections and then hospitalizations both increased dramatically.
So vaccinations are being given, and Dr. Anthony Fauci on Balance of Power with David Weston today says they're getting a good handle on the potential side effects.
They usually all occur within the first 12 hours, and they last between 24 and at the most 36 hours. It's extremely unusual for someone to have something beyond 36 to 48 hours.
He says at this point he hopes for normality by summer. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Mr. Baxter, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg. Carol Masser in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, once again with Charlie Pellet of Bloomberg News. This is right up your alley. It's by Kim Basine and Jordan Holman. They cover retail. They cover luxury retail. The headline on the story, gift cards surge to provide a much-needed boost for U.S. retailers. And gift cards, I hate giving them. I hate getting them, to be quite honest. No, I don't hate getting them. That's not fair. But I always like to give people presents. But nonetheless, gift cards are giving U.S. retailers, Charlie, a much-needed cash infusion as they close out a rough year. In this environment, it's an easy thing to do and give to someone.
Yeah, and indeed, you heard my idea that I floated on the air a couple of weeks ago. Airline gift cards. Why not sell them like at a, like an 80% discount? Pick a number there, but some kind of reasonable discount, and we can start giving the airlines money while at the same time consumers can be rewarded for making plans up front.
Well, we had the Samsonite North America president on yesterday, and they have a whole ad campaign. It's like, the gift of hope, and this whole idea of surprising people with airline tickets or luggage, and so that they can get ready to plan for trips, because they will come at some point, and that's kind of in keeping what you're thinking. But here's some numbers. Americans on course to buy more gift cards than ever before, with gift card spending this holiday expected to rise 19% compared to last year, according to the payment service Blackhawk Network.
Exactly, and our story outlines why retailers love gift cards. Each year, as much as $3 billion in cards go unused. Where do they go? They get lost. They sit around in wallets. Some of them just never, ever get cashed in. Some of them might be inappropriate gifts. You give a gift card to somebody who you may not know that well, and they may never go to that kind of store to begin with. So
I've done that. Isn't that terrible?
Yeah, you know what?
I bet you've never done that. You're so good with this kind of stuff.
No, I love the idea of giving gift cards, because sometimes you can't go wrong if you know the person you're going to give it to. On the other hand, isn't cash the ultimate gift card?
I know, but who wants to touch cash in this environment? Just gonna say.
There you go. Carol, you give me cash, we do not have a problem there.
You can give me Bitcoin, and anybody who wants to give me Bitcoin, just send it this way. All right, Charlie, thank you.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Late session swoon for NASDAQ. Ended the day with a loss. If you were listening to our updates throughout the day, you would have heard us mention that NASDAQ was at a record, but ended the day, the loss is really coming in the last 15 minutes or so. NASDAQ down 36 points today, a drop there of 0.3%. S&P up 2 points, up 0.1%. The Dow up 114, higher by 0.4%. Stocks up for the first time in 4 days, even as uncertainty surrounds President Trump's demand for changes to pandemic relief legislation. The 10-year down 8/30 seconds, 10-year yield 0.94%. Gold up 0.6%, 18.72 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.1%, 48.03 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Really appreciate that update. Well, it's Christmas Eve. According to data provided by the National Retail Federation, Americans plan to spend roughly $998 on gifts, food, and decorations this year, down about $50 from 2019. And almost all of the decrease is coming from the non-gift purchases category. So here with more on what is happening at shopping centers around the country, Tom McGee back with us, President and CEO of the International Council of Shopping Centers. He's on the phone in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. Tom, good to check in with you again. How's it going?
I'm doing all right. Happy holidays. It's good to be with you, Carol.
Yeah, happy holidays. I know. I asked the question. I know it's not an easy answer because it's just been such a crazy, crazy year. What are you hearing from your team? What are you hearing from the members within your community?
We went into, the holiday season cautiously optimistic, expecting, very, modest growth, about 1.9% growth year over year. We think that's still realistic. I think things were busy this last weekend. I think things will be busy right up until Christmas Day. Going into Super Saturday last weekend. Although the holiday season was certainly longer and people began their shopping much earlier, there was still a majority of people that had shopping still left to do. They hadn't completed their holiday shopping. And so I expect that, we will have a reasonably strong holiday season. I think there are a lot of, obviously, uncertainties in the marketplace right now, not the least of which was what you guys just made reference to in your news headlines around, the COVID relief package. And, we were very pleased that Congress had reached an agreement on that after months of negotiation. And, there's a lot that in there that helps, obviously unemployed Americans and Americans that are hurting in general through unemployment benefits and stimulus payments, but also small business, which is a huge part of our industry as well, with the extension of PPP and a number of other provisions like troubled debt restructuring and bankruptcy protections and so forth. And so my hope is that this will pass and that this will get implemented ASAP. We've always thought the risk was to do too little, not too much. But after months of negotiation, this is where we're at. And, we hope this gets implemented ASAP.
Yeah, listen, based on all the conversations we've had, just everybody just kind of shocked by what happened last night. If we do not get this through, and we don't get it through at least sooner rather than later, what are the implications for some of your large and smaller members?
Well, I think significant. 70% of the tenants in shopping centers, are small businesses. And obviously small businesses have been, severely impacted by, the pandemic, particularly, restaurants, but also small retailers and small service providers. And, particularly the PPP funding is critical. And there was also some provisions put in there around allowing deductibility and so forth that wasn't in the CARES Act or wasn't interpreted to be in the CARES Act. That's been clarified. So I think the lack of passing something will have dramatic impacts upon, our industry, but small business in general, and particularly small business, which has been so hurt by this and just did not have the kind of cushion going into this that many larger businesses had.
Tom, what's interesting is, and I feel like with some of the conversations I've had with individuals in the financial community and just in the world at large, the disconnect that we increasingly talk about here at Bloomberg between what we see on the stock market versus what we see on Main Street and individuals or small businesses. Like, it's just such a wide gap. And it makes me wonder, what is happening when you talk with members of Congress? What don't they understand about kind of the bedrock of our economy?
I think if you have, one-on-one conversations with politicians from both parties, they would recognize, the pain that's out, that people are going through right now. I think the challenge is just getting consensus, quite frankly. And, the political process, unfortunately, has become very messy, and we're witnessing it. I think it's a shame. It's a tragedy that we've gotten to this point. On December 23rd,
shocking
that we're at this point, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and everybody recognizes something needs to be done. And yet, at the 11th hour, first of all, it's shocking it took this long to get here to have a package. It should have been done months ago. But then we're at this point where there's this level of uncertainty. And as businesses operate best when there's some level of certainty in place, and they know the rules of the game and they know what's going to take place. And my goodness, there's just been nothing but uncertainty. And that's particularly hard on small businesses who don't have access to capital. Any other access to capital, at least the larger businesses have access to other forms of capital, whether that's the bond markets or the stock market and so forth. So many small business owners don't. And that's why that relationship, quite frankly, in our industry between landlord and tenant is so important. And there's been a lot of, flexibility between those two parties during this, where I think we would have seen a lot more small business failure.
Right. Talk about a symbiotic relationship. What are the conversations going on between landlords and tenants at this point?
I think they continue to be, fruitful. I think, there's obviously a lot of attention's paid to larger tenant and landlord conversations that maybe haven't been as positive. But generally speaking, throughout the pandemic, the landlord-tenant conversations have been fairly productive. It's in everybody's best interest. No landlord wants to lose a tenant, and no tenant wants to go out of business. And so everybody recognizes this is an unusual situation. And so there's been a lot of flexibility provided on both sides, and quite frankly, a lot of flexibility in actually implementing things to allow people to do things from a business perspective, whether that's things like curbside pickup and delivery, and the reorientation of parking lots and so forth, or dining and all those types of things to allow businesses to at least operate, even if it's in a suboptimal level during this period of time.
Hey, I have to ask you, just got about a minute here. Before Tesla was put into the S&P 500, Tom, Etsy was the best performing stock in the S&P 500. People, as you know, increasingly embracing online. And I wonder if the pandemic may have been the tipping point, the final catalyst over the hump, in terms of really pushing the masses online at this point. I know we talk about omni-channel, but I do wonder if there's something different that will impact brick and mortar going forward. And just got about 45 seconds.
No, I think the conversation around omni-channel continues. And I think to be successful in retail, you're going to have a successful online business and a successful physical business. And I think that the lines between those are blurred. I think we've seen an acceleration of trends, and I think that's going to continue. But I'm not, I don't buy into the death of brick and mortar, nor am I saying that online isn't, a serious element of retail going forward. I just think those two things converge, and I think if anything, the importance of physical retail has been displayed during the pandemic, and as you see people wanting to do, the convenience of that.
And lining up. Hey, listen, be well. Have a good holiday, Tom, and also Happy New Year. And I'm sure we'll be checking with you in the new year. Tom McGee, President and CEO of the International Council of Shopping Centers, with us once again on the phone in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. We've got a couple of interesting guests, too, in the last hour, so stick around for that.